In his book The Wehrmacht's Last Stand, Robert Citino ponders these questions. What kept the German army going in an increasingly hopeless situation? What kept the general staff planning, the commanders commanding, and the soldiers fighting, even when the situation clearly seemed hopeless? In his other book, The Wehrmacht's Retreats, he says, to ride the Totenritt, the death ride, you had to substitute faith, blind faith, for rational thought. Indeed, you had to stop thinking altogether. Citino ends up concluding that it was commanding officers like General Ferdinand Schörner, who was a competent general but ruthless to the core, that threatened to kill and often did kill deserters. And Citino says it was mainly the stick that kept the Wehrmacht fighting until 5 minutes past midnight, rather than the carrot. Now, Citino is correct that generals like Schörner were a major factor in keeping the German army fighting to the bitter end. In fact, I talked about this point in my video on why Germany kept fighting. But the problem with this explanation is that it doesn't answer the question, why? Why would Schörner, and many like him, want to keep the troops fighting? And why were most of the troops eager to keep fighting too? Well, the reason why is because by the time you get to 1944 and 45, Hitler had taken spiritual control of the German army. At a conference on the 8th of June 1943, Hitler said, "I see one thing out of all this today, and that is the decisive point for me. We must not allow a wrong opinion to arise on our side. There is a difference between the propaganda that I make over there and what we do ourselves in the end." Keitel responded, "What we do behind our front lines." And Hitler continued, "And above all, what we believe. On our side, we must not allow the slightest intensification in the belief that we could really, let us say, find a compromise solution in this way. I see a risk in that alone, if something like this gradually takes root among us." In Hitler's view, the decisive point is that it's all about belief. Everyone has to have the same beliefs, and if they don't, then that's the problem. And the question is, why? Why is that a problem? And why is Hitler so obsessed with the spiritual and ideological issue when it comes to the German army? Surely it should be about the number of tanks, ships, planes, bullets and bombs, not about what the generals believe. And yet he rants about this all the time. As we've seen in the famous Downfall movie, he says it was the generals that betrayed him. They're the ones at fault because they didn't go in alignment with him. In fact, this is why Franz Halder was sacked as Chief of the General Staff. After Situation Conference, farewell by the Führer. My nerves are worn out, also his nerves are no longer fresh. We must part. Necessity for educating the General Staff in fanatical faith in the idea. He is determined to enforce his will also into the army. We're going to read a lot more quotes from Hitler on this idea as we move forward, because this stuff is throughout the military conferences and it's hard to miss, but the historians have largely ignored it. Most have dismissed him as Madman Hitler, the carpet biter, who was some sort of lunatic. And yes, he was to some extent, but the truth is that he had a reason. It's just that the historians and generals don't know what that reason was. They don't understand it. They're not looking into the ideology because they're empiricists. They don't believe in looking outside of the tanks. So they'll just dismiss it or try to find other explanations by studying the battles themselves. But you can't ignore it. This idea of belief is right there at the heart of the military situation. Hitler is the driving force behind the war, and his decision-making process is based on this belief. So if you don't understand the belief, you can't really explain the war, or why Hitler made the decisions he made, or why the German army kept fighting until 5 minutes past midnight. Well, I have figured this out. So I think it's worth briefly explaining Hitler's thought process now, and then looking at more of the quotes. So the core idea is this. Everything is made of atoms, and atoms are made of energy, so think string theory, And energy is the thoughts of God, or Providence, or Odin. The thoughts of God manifest as energies that flow throughout the universe. And so, all they have to do, Hitler thinks, is tune themselves into this frequency. They'll gain communion with God, and then they will be victorious. Every soul is connected with the collective cosmic consciousness. The primary aim of life is to move toward and merge with this universal consciousness. When you live harmoniously with nature, you enhance your vibrational frequency, which drives you closer to God. And when in conflict with nature, your vibrational frequency decreases. The neo-fascist movement called the Iron March quote from Ernst Junger in their book Fascist Economics and Socialism of Duty. Ernst Junger was technically not a National Socialist, he was just a nationalist, but they quote from him nonetheless. Nationalism does not wish to make peace with the rule of the mass, but demands the dominance of identity, whose supremacy is made up of inner content and living energy. It desires to gain strong ties, order, to grow roots in society, blood and soil. It does not wish for socialism of opportunities. It longs for socialism of duty, for that rigid, stoic world that the individual man must sacrifice himself to. The Iron March then comments on this, and I'd like to point out that by duty, of course, they mean God. And therein lies the inherent relationship of blood and soil nationalism and the socialism of duty, to realise one's own nature with joy and to fulfil one's place in a social order where everyone is duty bound. In total, one can hardly deny that socialism is a system that subjugates economy to duty before the nation, and one that elevates every man to reach his potential and share in common joy of duty to the cosmic order. This is why Hitler's a vegetarian and doesn't drink, etc., because his body wouldn't be in tune with the divine if he did. And it's also why many Buddhists meditate and try to find enlightenment, and why people say you've got to get in touch with your spiritual side and light a candle. What they're trying to do is tune themselves into the frequency of this energy that permeates across the cosmos, as they call it. And this next quote is coming from a National Socialist from the time, explaining that a Nordic man is in tune with the divine and has to keep fighting because of that. For the Nordic man, body, soul and spirit form an inseparable unity. The Nordic man believes in eternal life, in his children and grandchildren, in his acts and the work for which he lives. Further on, he believes in continuing to live according to the eternal forces of the divine in whatever form. For the Germanic man, life is the same as movement. The history of the Germanic people is a constant movement, a constant conflict. This is, of course, related to Heraclitus's becoming, Hegel's Aufheben, and Hitler's struggle. It's the dialectic, the transcendence of the soul from the material world as a means to get to God. One of life's greatest experiences is constant development, changing over and over again. This is the call of God, the call to be in movement. People on the move do not rest and do not find peace. The Germanic man believes in superior and divine energy, but are distanced from magic. Here's another National Socialist, this time from the SS main office, the top brass. Life means fighting. We face this principle inexorably and with hardness. Either that order is accepted in the best possible way or abandoned and we die. To live means to fight. This order that Providence has given distinguishes the master from the slave. There had always been times when it had been thought possible to circumvent this mandate, in which it was believed that struggle was an abomination, in which it was a question of transferring the struggle of this world to another. But now we are in this age of accumulated energies, with a combative and creative spirit, and an unusual will to live. We approve of life because we love the fight. We approve the fight because we love life. For us, life is a battlefield that Providence has given us, a providential order. I mean, that pretty much says it all. And of course, when other people fail to tune themselves into this divine energy frequency, this will cause bad things to happen to the racial collective. So if you go to Hitler and you say, look, I lost this battle, and the reason why is because I didn't have enough men, Hitler would say, no, the issue here is that you didn't have the spirit. You didn't tune yourself into God's thoughts and become one with Providence. This is why he's saying it's all about belief. We must not allow a wrong opinion to arise on our side. If they allow a wrong opinion to arise or a bad belief system, then this will distort the frequency and make them lose the war. Regardless of why your energy is depleting, it translates to dishonoring the divinity within. It means you have replaced divinity with something or someone else, which is against the law of self. Honoring yourself is not being selfish. I mean, it is, unless by self you mean the collective self, which is not the same thing, but regardless, the reason why I'm quoting from this hermeticist is because that's where Hitler's ideology is coming from. This idea of tuning into the divine frequency is also tied to the Führer principle, or the Führer principle. If Hitler, the spiritual leader, or Führer, has tuned himself into the frequency of God, then everyone else should follow him. And any deviation from the Führer principle, any deviation from the correct godly frequency, is obviously going to be bad. So, far from being concerned about the number of tanks or men, Hitler's primary concern is the spiritual situation of the men, having them all in alignment with the ideology of National Socialism. The only cult we know is that of a cultivation of the natural, and hence of that which God has willed. We stand in complete and unconditional humility before the divine laws as revealed to man. These laws we respect, and our prayer is one of bravest fulfillment of the duties entailed. We cannot be held responsible for acts of worship. After all, that is the domain of the churches. This ideology says it's not about material things, it's about the spirit. It's mind over matter. And Hitler genuinely thinks this. He believes that if they can synchronize everyone together with the same thought, all the material problems can be overcome. The lack of tanks is not an issue if you have faith. In fact, this idea of belief and spirituality becomes blatantly obvious in the military conferences, especially the one on the 7th of January 1944. On the 23rd of December 1943, Adolf Hitler ordered the creation of the NSFO, the National Socialist Leadership Officers. These were placed in key positions inside the German army, and this organisation was placed under the command of General Hermann Reinecke, shown here next to Ronald Freisler of the infamous People's Court. Reinecke was a very notable general in the sense that he was the chief of the operations staff in the OKW and would be sentenced after the war for his role in the killing of millions of Soviet POWs, a topic I've talked about in a previous video. This guy was a National Socialist through and through, and so he was now tasked with indoctrinating the German army with National Socialist ideology. A military conference was therefore conducted on the 7th of January 1944 with Hitler, Reinecke, Bormann, Keitel, Schmundt, Schurf and Borgmann in attendance. They were there to discuss the most effective way of introducing these new National Socialist leadership officers into the army to get everyone in alignment with Hitler's ideology. Reinecke said, There must be a revolution with regard to the appointment of all those officers who are to be active in this area now. They must be made equal in position and importance to the tactical command and the personal command everywhere. I believe that must be the foundation. There must, therefore, be a complete change in the meaning, so that externally it must be made clear in all guidelines and orders that the war can be won with 51% certainty through the ideological attitude and orientation of all officers. New methods, therefore, also new weapons. There you go. By changing the ideological attitude of the officers, this would alone give them a 51% chance of victory in January 1944. Admittedly, this was before Operation Bagration or the Normandy landings, but it is after El Alamein, Stalingrad, Kursk, or the invasion of Italy and the collapse of Mussolini's regime. So while they weren't defeated, there was little chance of victory here. And yeah, here's the evidence that they thought there was still a chance, if only they could get everyone in tune with God. Hitler said, "There will be great resistance against it," which shows that Hitler thinks that the generals are not on his side. Keitel responded, "No, my Führer, we don't expect that." Schmundt said, "I don't believe it." And Keitel continued, "We've already come a long way with the education. I've also spoken about it with Reichsleiter Bormann. In some places there may be uncomprehending people who will have to be convinced or brought to it by order. For the rest, there's absolute and unequivocal understanding." Keitel has traditionally been seen as Hitler's lapdog, and yeah, here he did actually technically disagree with him. Of course, it was to reassure him that the army would accept these measures, but nonetheless, he was able to put his opinion forward, so I wanted to just highlight that. Reinecker, though, goes on to talk about how the command structure would look in practice, saying that these new officers would be veterans from the front with iron crosses, and they would be in every headquarters from division and up. They couldn't go lower than that due to the lack of officers. To guarantee to Hitler that the right men would fill the role, Reinecker says they wanted to carry out a purge and clear out the intellectuals from all these positions. Hitler was also concerned that the regular officers, especially the generals, wouldn't care, but Reinecker and Keitel explained that there were plans in place for that. During this discussion, Hitler then says this: "We must not recoil from holding such commanders responsible for that. Because one thing is critical. This thing makes sense only if it isn't considered a kind of private issue, which one can either do or not do, and above all, it must be made clear right from the beginning that any criticism and grumbling about orders issued in the ideological field will be punished just the same as criticism of tactical or any other military matters, so that it will cost the officers involved position and insignia. Everybody must know that it's not a matter of free will, and that he must not say, 'Actually, it's nonsense, I don't believe this,' and so on. That cannot happen." A little later, General Schmundt says, "The most important thing is that the responsibility of the commanders is maintained. The commander is the commissar. That's the trust that you, my Führer, have placed in him." So, the German generals themselves will become the commissars. That's what Schmundt has just said. This is what leads generals like Schörner to start executing his own men to keep them in line. The generals were about to become the commissars of the German army. Those that weren't in alignment were to be removed, hence why Manstein was sacked not long after in March 1944, and those that were the most fanatical were placed in positions of power. I'd like to add here that especially the instructions for the National Socialist Leadership Officers must outline all these problems very clearly, so that the National Socialist Leadership Officer won't become a politruk, political officer in the Red Army, or a complaint office, like a kind of Republican complaint office again on the one hand, but also not a priest on the other hand. He shouldn't go from division to the troops and appear as a speaker like a preacher in the desert. Instead, he should consider it his goal to teach the officers the art of really leading the people in the political ideological way. That's what I see his main task, not to appear as a priest and speaker and give presentations everywhere. The generals weren't following National Socialist principles, and that was the reason Hitler thought they were on the back foot. Therefore, these officers weren't sent in to preach and give presentations, they were there to instill the ideology into the generals. Hitler then goes on to explain how he trained people in the early days of the party and says that it must be crucial that everyone be on the same page, so that if an ideological problem arises, it will be dealt with in the same way in one division or another. And this discussion goes on a while longer, back and forth, with nobody really saying anything in concrete, except that it was important to get everyone on board with this. Hitler then brings up General Walter von Seydlitz-Kurzbach, who had commanded the 51st Army Corps at Stalingrad, but had surrendered. See my 51 episode Stalingrad series for more information on that battle. Seydlitz was now part of the Soviet Union's National Committee for Free Germany, or NKFD. Seydlitz was the head of the League of German Officers, or BDO, which was sending out appeals urging more Germans to surrender. Hitler says, "The most dangerous thing happening at the front right now is without doubt the appeals coming from General Seydlitz. It comes under a black, white, red flag, and the man in the trenches doesn't know, is it true or not? It comes from officers, and the man so far has had the opinion that officers are men of honour. That man isn't aware that a number of such swine exist. There's no doubt that these are not people who are acting under pressure now. These people are not just being pushed forward, they're acting on their own. One just needs to read the writings. I know the dialectics and diction of the Jews very well. You can recognise immediately whether something has been done by a general staff officer or by a Jew." I'm not sure if he's calling Seydlitz a Jew here, but what he is saying is that Seydlitz is threatening the spiritual coherence within the army. This spiritual attack, according to Hitler, is the most dangerous thing happening at the front right now. This shows you where his priorities lie. It's not in the number of tanks or the amount of fuel, it's simply in the minds of the men. In my opinion, a gradual adoption of the National Socialist body of thought by the entire armed forces is the most important thing there is. How is a man supposed to be ready in the end to give his utmost if he doesn't know exactly why? There you go. This is the most important thing to Hitler, the spirit of the German army. It used to be said for Christianity, as long as it was a battle for Christianity that Christians fought. Later, when the battles were about matters regarding the monarchy, the Christian issue wasn't effective anymore. This, by the way, suggests that Hitler wasn't a Christian. Despite all the doping, the Bavarians didn't become any braver either. That had nothing to do with Christianity anymore. Today, where it's about the basic elements of existence or non-existence, about ruin or survival of the races, we must make it absolutely clear to that man. He must know what it's about. If someone goes out and tells his own people, if we lose the war, we'll experience a wonderful renaissance together with the Russians, that's a crime, an unparalleled disaster. They've removed their Tukhachevsky, and such an idiot like Kurt von Seydlitz thinks he'll remain then. Those creatures are dumb, or it's a lack of character that's completely without bounds, usually both together. We have to take a position against it. So it's all about the survival of the races and the question of existence or non-existence. Again, instead of a lack of tanks or anything else, he's saying that this is a morale problem, a spiritual or ideological problem. After Reinecke brings up the question of saluting, Hitler then says, "Two things will be done on January 30th, 1944. The regimental flags will be taken down and the German salute will be introduced for the armed forces." Keidel says something unimportant, and Reinecke says, "I thought that propagandistically we could maybe direct the thoughts to the introduction of the German salute shortly beforehand, by telling the people who talk so much of tradition, if we're so attached to tradition, we could latch onto Frederick the Great and reinforce the old salute that was used back then. That's a tradition from a time when Prussia was at war. Schmunt says, I don't think that's the most important thing. They all know that very well. The point is that there is still many officers who have always saluted that way, from their time as cadets up to field marshal, and they'll find it strange if they have to salute differently now. I, for one, didn't know this. I've always assumed that the German army had used the Musk salute since 1936. I just imagined that they'd started doing that when they took the oath to Hitler after Hindenburg's death, but yeah, apparently not. So this was news to me. But again, the reason why they were going to change the salute was because it would be further in alignment with God, since the salute itself, the Sieg Heil, is hailing victory, and as I've shown before, the Sieg rune was Odin's rune. So they're actually hailing Odin. This is all about the spiritual issue, and after a bit more back and forth over this, Hitler says, considering the great future tasks, we can only come out of this battle as an absolutely united ideological body. He also says a little later, our gentlemen in Stalingrad reported to me that the Russians would charge with unfurled flags. They were very shocked by this story. Hitler has just confirmed that that scene in Enemy at the Gates definitely happened. And yes, I am being sarcastic. There may well have been some charging with flags, but no, I've covered this issue a few times now, so check out the other videos on that. But the military conference ends with a discussion on who should be the officer in charge to get the ball rolling with the NSFO when it comes to the army itself. Hitler says, Schroeder. He's a fanatic. Keitel says, yes, he's a fanatic and pulls people with him. I don't want to see how he handles the people who don't follow when he comes to the front and removes the people who don't follow their responsibilities. If we could have him for a couple of months, if he could be released from his command post for a time so he could get this thing here underway, then we could release him for another assignment after he had instructed and trained others. We need a fanatic, so that the thing will take the right shape first, and he would do that wonderfully. This is an assignment to which the greatest importance is attached. It wasn't long after this that Schroeder ended up being given command of Army Group A, going from a corps commander to an army commander and then an army group commander in a very short space of time. So this is where Schroeder starts his rise. But now let's turn to the Hitler Youth. Why would they send young boys to fight and die in the war? Well, it's because these young boys were the first generation to be truly brought up as National Socialists. This means they are further in tune with the divine. At another conference on the 26th of July 1943, Hitler says, the young people fight fanatically, the ones from the Hitler Youth. Young German boys, some of them 16 years old. These Hitler Youth usually fight more fanatically than their older comrades. After a bit more of this, Himmler says, they are good divisions now, my Führer. That's how the Hitler Youth Panzergrenadier Division will fight, and the youth in general. They have already been uniformly trained. They will get the shock of their lives there. These are young boys, but they are now trained for a long time. A little later, Goering says, recently it was said that people between 26 and 30 have proven to be the best fighters. Himmler replied, on average, purely physically. Yeah, the soldiers in their late 20s are better physically, but not spiritually. The Hitler Youth, Himmler is saying, is better than the older soldiers because these young boys have been indoctrinated into the National Socialist faith. They are more fanatical and better soldiers because they've been tuned into the right frequency. This is as opposed to the Germans coming from other countries, the Volksdeutsche, who aren't fully in alignment. This is also why Hitler rejects the idea of having the Russians and Ukrainians fighting with the Germans. They are former Baltic aristocrats and other Baltic Germans, but there are also former Ukrainians who have settled in Germany. Some of them, unfortunately, have even been naturalized. and who, of course, watch the German liberation action with great pleasure. But in the background, they don't see our nationally defined goals. They see their own goals instead. Later he says, claiming that now we just need to establish a Ukrainian state and everything will be alright, and then we'll get 1 million soldiers. We won't get anything, not even one man. That's a figment of the imagination, just as it was in the past. The reason why is because these people aren't in alignment with the spiritual goals of German National Socialism. For Hitler, a nation or racial group that doesn't have the right spirit will be near useless, and a good example of this is the Italians. The Allies would land in Sicily in July 1943, but before this point, during the military conference of the 20th of May 1943, a special leader called Konstantin Alexander von Neurath, not to be confused with the von Neurath who was in charge of Bohemia, came back from the front to give a report of what was going on. Neurath reported that Italian General Mario Roata wasn't very optimistic about the possibility of defending Sicily. He was too weak in both equipment and men, having only one motorised division at hand. The English were attacking his trains, and they were having trouble obtaining supplies. In addition, when we crossed from Giovanni to Messina, my impression was that almost all traffic had ceased on this short route. Of the ferries that had previously operated there, I believe there were 6 of them. Only one has survived. This ferry is under museum protection, as they call it. They treat it as gently as possible and plan to preserve it for better purposes. What are better purposes? Hitler asked. Well, my Führer, the Italians often say when the war is over, and they also say one never knows what the future will bring. At any rate, this ferry wasn't in operation. Maybe there was some technical problem, but the German gentleman I met there said there was no such problem. The discussion goes on to other things, the general situation in Sicily, how the population doesn't like the Germans, and whether or not to send more of the Hermann Göring Parachute Panzer Division over to the island. Then Keitel asks, "Can this ferry be repaired?" Neurath replied, "Field Marshal, that should not be a problem." "There you are," said Hitler. "It could even be done without such a ferry," Neurath said. "Well," said Hitler, "the point is this. The decisive element is not the ferry, but the will." "It's only the characteristic element," said von Neurath, and Hitler replied, "Where there is a will, there is a ferry." That's right. When there's a will, there's a ferry. Again, what matters here is the will. If people have the spirit of National Socialism, Hitler thinks that any material issue can be overcome. The material issue isn't the problem, it's the lack of will, the lack of spirit. And Hitler goes on to confirm this. Out of the 20 or 30 ferries operated by the Italians and by us, 60% of ours were operative, and 10% of the Italian ones. They were constantly plagued with problems. Probably it was no different with tanks. I have seen the number of Italian tanks shrink very fast in each operation. After 2 or 3 days, there was hardly an Italian tank left. They were all being repaired. I'd say it's a problem of will. The Italians, apparently, don't have the will, don't have the spirit, and that's why their material doesn't work. Mind over matter, or mind shapes matter, which is actually what the fascists believed. Something similar to the National Socialists. Well, Erwin Rommel was at this conference, and he asked, "My Führer, wouldn't it be possible for the Italians to send more troops to Sicily and defend it instead of us? Everything is possible. The only question is whether they want to defend it." And I'll just point out, the emphasis on want is in the book. I'm not adding that in there. If they really want to defend it, then anything could be done. What worries me is not the inability, for if one really wants to defend it, there is no doubt that it is possible, and we could bring in troops too. No, what worries me is these people's lack of desire, and we do see this. The Duce can try as hard as he wants, but he is sabotaged. The words want and desire were both emphasised by Hitler, And the reason why is because that's what this is all about. Willpower and spirit is emotion, not reason. When Hitler rejects reason, all he's left with is emotions. He feels the answer to the problem. And this is the spirit of National Socialism. So for Hitler, the reason he's losing the war is because the generals mainly are the ones not following his vision. And his vision is aligned with the divine energy of the cosmos. That's why he ends up ranting at them during the famous downfall scene in the bunker in 1945. He's furious that they weren't in alignment with him, that they betrayed him, and says he should have purged the officer corps like Stalin did. He thinks that if he had purged the officers and got a bunch of fanatics in there, like Schroeder, then he would have won. Now, the reason I was able to make this connection and figure this all out was because I've started going backwards. I didn't just stick to tanks and keep looking at the battles, hoping that somehow the answers would be found there. No, this is an ideological answer, which means we should be looking at the ideology for the equation. Unfortunately, as I've said at the beginning, most of the historians are not looking into this stuff. They're focused on, the war stuff, and yet the answer isn't in the war stuff. This is, like looking for a fish in the desert. You're just not going to find them there. But I'm stubbornly not sticking to tanks. I'm looking into the hermeticism religion, which National Socialism is borrowing from, and I've also started reading the works of Helena Blavatsky, who inspired the early National Socialists like Guido von List. I'm going to end this video by quoting from her, saying that there's an energy source coming from God that is everywhere, even in the rocks. That this astral light permeates the whole cosmos, lurking in its latent state, even in the minutest particle of rock. They, the Rosicrucians, demonstrate by the phenomenon of the spark from flint and from every other stone, whose spirit, when forcibly disturbed, springs to sight spark-like, and immediately disappears in the realms of the unknowable. Thanks for watching, bye for now.